Another very important group within the life of Israel, or with Judea in this particular stage, are the Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees were really a rival faction to the Pharisees. And they both originated, or at least the Sadducees definitely originated during the period of the Maccabees. In the Maccabean revolt, the leaders of the Maccabean revolt, people like Simon Maccabeus, Judas Maccabeus, they not only became the kings, but they also took on the mantle of the religious leadership of the Jews. And so, in the end, the Maccabean kings were also high priests. And in that situation, what we realize is that the priesthood then becomes part of the leadership structure of the people. When the Maccabees actually ended, or at least the period of the Maccabees ended under Roman rule, is that this group continues to survive and continues to look after the temple practices. These are the aristocracy. They're the upper crust of the society who continue to maintain the priesthood. And of course, to give them sense of legitimacy, they want to trace their lineage back to the origins of priesthood. And of course, in Judaism, the origins of priesthood are found within one section of the tribe of Levi. Of course, that's the family of Aaron. And so it's in Aaron's family that what we find is the priests of the people of Israel. And so that priesthood goes all the way through from the time of release from Egypt, from the slavery in Egypt, through the Exodus. And then they trace their sense of priesthood all the way through until the greatest of the priests, the one who kind of personifies priesthood. And that is Zadok. Zadok, who was the high priest during the time of the first temple, during Solomon's temple. And he was the one who dedicated the first temple. And so Zadok becomes, just like Moses was in a sense the symbol of the law, and Elijah was the symbol of prophecy, we have Zadok, who is the symbol or the concept or the personification of the priesthood. And of course, Sadducee is really just an anglicization of Zadok. So Sadduq or Zadok is where we get the word Sadducee from. So Sadducee are really the inheritors or the continuation of the people of Zadok. We know, of course, that in fact there's a lot of the Maccabees weren't from the tribe of Levi. They weren't from the priesthood, but they took on that mantle in order to be able to take on all the cultic frameworks of the temple. So it was the Sadducees, therefore, who looked after the temple worship, who looked after the cultic worship of Judaism. In many ways, they were the ones, therefore, who controlled what was happening during the temple precinct and what was happening within it. They were aristocrats, and in many ways, their real frame was here on earth. They had no belief in the afterlife. They had no belief in an afterlife or a resurrection of the dead or any of those things. They didn't believe in them. They believed that you live here on earth, so therefore you may as well eat, drink, be merry, have as much money as you can, because once you've gone, that's it. You can imagine that would have brought them into some conflict, even with the Pharisees, because the Pharisees did believe in an afterlife. They did believe in the resurrection. And so there was a natural enmity between the two of them. And in many ways, the Pharisees would have been the ones who had separated from that priestly group, from that priestly perspective, that cultic perspective of Judaism. So there was no love lost between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And yet the interesting part, of course, in the Gospels is to show how the Sadducees and the Pharisees used to come together in order to test Jesus. In many ways, it's my enemy's enemy is my friend, would be the reality of what would be happening. And certainly what, in fact, the gospel writers were trying to convey is that even though these two groups would have had nothing in common with each other, they were prepared to unite against someone who was going to be both critical of both their perspectives. And of course, Jesus is highly critical of even the Sadducees. And we see that when after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where he goes immediately to the temple and overthrows the tables of the money changers. Those money changers would be there at the behest of the Sadducees. Constantly, Jesus said to them that in fact this temple will no longer survive. That in fact this temple will be destroyed. Of course, anybody who's going to tell you that your livelihood and all that you stand for is going to be destroyed is someone that you are not going to treat with great affection. And in fact, the Sadducees, therefore, were part of this process. The Sadducees were also on the Sanhedrin, and they were part of the Sanhedrin. So what they were able to do was to be at the time of Jesus' trial and actually convict him of the blasphemy that they held. Even though many of the things that Jesus spoke about, they wouldn't have really cared a lot about at all. But they did care about their livelihood. They did care about their structure and their system. And in many ways, they saw Jesus as a real threat to that system. We know that after 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the temple. And at that point, the Sadducees basically fade back into the background of Jewish society. And no longer do we hear about them. They are not mentioned in Paul's writings. They're not mentioned in later writings of the Jews either. In many ways, that whole group ceases to exist once the temple no longer is available. So when we look at the Sadducees, we need to understand that they again were for Jesus a perversion of what God was trying to do. That what they were doing was they were replacing a relationship with God with all the trappings and the rituals and the sacrifices of the temple. What they wanted to do was to focus everybody's attention at the temple, not because they wanted people to have a close relationship with God, but because that was in their best interest. Again, this group becomes for us a very important understanding. It becomes something for us to really have a look at our own churches and say, are our churches Sadducee churches? Where in fact it's more important for our people to come to us and to help pay for us than it is to come to our places of worship and find a relationship with God. Are our churches just places of ritual, or our churches places of real, vibrant, living relationship?